OTAN, Outreach and Technical Assistance Network.
Technology and Adult Education, Past, Present, and Future. OTAN Technology and Distance Learning Symposium 2019.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I love that slide, OTAN's founding father. I mean, that must mean I'm old, right? And it's true, as my wife will say, I have failed retirement. But you know what? Once an adult educator, always an adult educator. And I just love it. I still love being involved. Especially gratifying to be here because, number one, this is where OTAN was born, on this very campus. Room 17, as a matter, yay! And this is where I met my lovely wife as well. It was here, so it really has special meaning. But let me tell you, it looked really different back when we were here. That was a big green field back there. And we had campuses and leased buildings over off of Valley Boulevard and a couple of other elementary schools. That's all changed, but I love what the district has done. This is a fantastic program, it really is. So today I'd like to talk about the past, the present, and the not too distant future. My favorite topics. I really, really love it. So, and today what I plan to cover is before computer-assisted instruction, the online revolution, which has changed everything. I mean, it literally has. In just such a short period of time, and I've lived through it. I'd also like to integrate some of the current trends with technology-based instruction, and then throughout the presentation, weave in some strategies, some things that people are doing to integrate technology into instruction. But first, being the old guy here, I want to take just a short trip down memory lane. So I had just got my secondary teaching credential, and I applied for a job. Said, I don't know much. Oh, look, I actually had a lot of hair then. It wasn't gray. But the beard is still here. So I applied for a job here to be a right-to-read tutor trainer. And I got so hooked on adult ed. I was going to be a high school teacher. But once I tasted adult ed, I just couldn't go back. Trained volunteers to teach reading in the community. And one of the unique things, it was really a lot of fun. It's even 45 years ago, almost 45 years ago, the realization that childcare is so important. We took some old school buses. We converted one to a classroom and one to a childcare bus. We'd roll those buses around the La Puente area, park them in front of an elementary school. The mothers would drop their kids off on the childcare bus and then come on to the instructional bus for instruction. And that's probably even forward thinking today. So from there, I went to jail. And honestly, that's what place that really turned me on to the power of technology. I started there about 81, and at that time, the school district had the contract for all education, all the jail facilities. And, you know, of course, that's where we have a significant number of functional literate adults that really are in desperate need of help. But hardcore gang members, they don't want to admit they can't read. So we got this idea, well, you know, there's these things called Apple computers out now. You have 48K in memory, disk drives. Let's experiment with that. And it was like magic. These inmates would sit down, hardcore gang members, sit down at the computer, do these interactive activities, not have to admit to anyone they couldn't read. So it really turned me on to the power of using technology with adult learning. And that's where I spent the rest of my career. Now, you notice there in that picture, can you see that picture? Do you see those computers? Can you tell what those are? This is 1985, and there are Macintosh computers. Mac came out in what, 84, right? Apple was really involved in adult literacy back then. A guy by the name of James Kelly, they had a major initiative. And they became aware of the work I was doing in the LA jails. They invited me to come up to the Apple corporate headquarters and to do a presentation to the board about what they can do to support adult ed. They picked me up at the San Jose airport in a limo. I just felt so spoiled. It was really quite an experience. And at the party afterwards, a little gathering after the presentation, one of the vice presidents in Apple said, well, could you use some computers, these new Macintosh computers in your jail program? And I flippantly said, sure, I'll take 25. Well, a week later, a truck pulled up in the compound down at Men's Central Jail. The deputy calls, Mr. Fleischman, there's a truck here with a bunch of boxes. Would you please come down and get them? And there were 25 brand new Macintosh computers. Pretty amazing. And to this day, I think, I should have asked for 50. Well, it's quite an experience. couple of years later, Olga Dorsey, one of the first directors of OTAN, approached me and said, the state's going to put out this RFP. They think technology can be used to help connect adult educators together. Now remember, this is before the World Wide Web. We had modems back then. I said, well, that sounds really interesting. And so we put together a proposal. And lo and behold, it got funded in December of 1989. Originally did some staff development. Originally a lot of focus on building library collections. But the focus has always been using technology to help up the game for adult educators and to help them to communicate and share information. Again, it was before the web. We set up a statewide network of modems so people could use an 800 number to dial in, make this, some of you may remember modems, 350 baud, very fast, very fast. And we used this America Online version, and we called it OTAN Online. Eventually, we moved to Gopher, and then when the web came out, we were real excited in 1994. We can move everything over to the web. And the rest is history. It's been just an amazing 30 years. It really has been. So that's my little trip down memory lane. Thank you for the indulgence. The sad thing is, you know, we really haven't made that much of a dent. It still is. It's the same numbers. We have a lot more Americans. It's still about 23% are at the lowest level of literacy. About 42 million Americans are still at that basic level, basic proficiency level. 50% are unable to read a book written at an 8th grade level. 90% can't read a newspaper. And in this day and age of fake news and so much information floating around, it's really in our interest to have all Americans be literate. So the struggle continues. But what I've discovered, and those of you, my peers in the room here, is that technology is making a difference. It will continue to make a difference, but we're still at the early stages. We're still learning. Yes, it is moving very fast. Yes, it's hard to deal with all the changes, but it's exciting, and I see some just amazing applications that are happening already. The chalkboard, the first technology, 1890. The pencil, another revolutionary technology. It's always with you. You can always communicate, but a significant invention. I remember as a kid going to the public library, and my mom would take me down into the basement, and I would have these stereoscopes. Do any of you remember stereoscopes? A couple of you are nodding your heads. You'd take these cards, and you'd hold it up, and you'd get a three-dimensional look. Pretty revolutionary technology for the time, almost over 100 years ago. And then the ubiquitous film projector. The early one, 1925, came out, and those were used for what, a good 30, 40 years. So film projectors progressed, but it was an effective way to bring the outside world into the classroom. There was all kinds of derivations. There was one called the controlled reader, which would put text out at a certain speed, so it would help students with reading proficiency and fluency. One of the first, most powerful distance learning tools, the radio. Used very effectively in Alaska. I think Penny was educated by some of her early education by radio. Still used today, and still very effective for distance learning. That tool, I don't see a whole lot of these in classrooms anymore because it's about projectors now. But the first overhead projector, and I remember in the early days of OTAN, we actually carried an overhead projector with us through the airport, and we carried these, what are called LCD panels. You'd set it on top, connect it to your computer, set it on top of the projector, and that's how you would project the computer image. And the ballpoint pen, hard to believe, 1940, ballpoint pen, but another revolutionary instrument. Yes, it does seem pretty primitive. And some of you, I remember the purple ink all over you, the mimeograph machines. And during the break, the teachers would be madly turning that crank in the room, printing out those handouts. It seems like ages ago. Reel-to-reel audio. That was the cat's meow, being able to record audio and play it back. Language labs, that's all they had back. The early language labs was audio recorders and players. About that same time, headphones. You can compare these to earbuds now, and where we are today with headphones and Bluetooth headphones a long time ago. Yeah. And then one of the first, in the early days here, when I was at Hacienda La Puente and during the time I was in the jail program, we were very into programmed textbooks. So students would complete their high school courses by going through programmed learning materials. But really the forerunner of that, the father of that, B.F. Skinner, the early teaching machines. So program learning, which of course was kind of the forerunner to computer-assisted instruction, it really kind of launched a whole revolution in terms of learning theory and approach to learning. Next tool of major significance, which really came on strong, educational television in the 1950s. The first major research in American Samoa that really found and discovered the effectiveness. And of course, kids in the 50s, when I went to elementary school, were subjected to educational TV. Our Spanish teacher came in once a week on educational television. But even today, and again, throughout more rural areas, educational television is still very popular. And throughout communities, local access, local origination, still very popular throughout the United States as a learning tool. But it is quickly being overtaken, of course, by the interactive web as more and more people get connected. Back in the 60s then, the audio cassette recorders, kind of, again, by the wayside. Film strip viewers in 1965. And then video cassette tape, which again, by the wayside. VHS, you remember VHS and Beta? VHS wasn't the superior technology, but it won out because they had better marketing. The actual early Betamax was a superior technology. But this was the mainstay in schools for many, many years. Well, the real revolution was with the birth of the computers. And the first significant computer, there were computing devices out there, but the computer of any significance was ENIAC, the electronic numerical integrator and computer. Look at all those wires. It looks pretty primitive compared to what we have today. And then in the early 1950s, UNIVAC, which started introduction of tape drives, a lot more sophisticated than just a few years previously. But the world changed about 7 years later. And the world changed with the invention, this guy, Jack Kilby, the invention of the integrated circuit. And I remember my dad saying, to me, this will revolutionize everything. And you know what? It has. Because everything today is based, all of technology, electronics, our cars, televisions, our homes, the internet, everything based on integrated circuits. So it really revolutionized the ability to get millions of transistors, basically, on one small chip. The IBM 360 was the first big business machine, 1964. Revolutionized business in so many different ways. You've heard the term mainframe, which has kind of gone by the wayside. But this was really the first application of technology was for big business. I think a lot of folks didn't see the potential for education. But not so long after that, it's the rise of computer-aided instruction. The first systems out there, which originally developed for the military by Plato, Program Logic for Automatic Teaching Operations. Look at the green screen there. But some of you may be old enough to remember this was the first interactive. It was basically presenting information in a tutorial mode. It wasn't highly interactive. There was no graphics. It was pretty limited. But it really took hold. And it took hold both for industry training, and I think the potential was really seen for instructional training for both K-12 and other learning populations. But probably one of the early pioneers was a professor at Stanford. Patrick Supis was his name. And he was the one that kind of came up with the idea for more interactive curriculum and developing a K-12 delivery system, Computer Curriculum Corporation, born out of Stanford, where a number of technologies were developed. But he really began the revolution in computer-assisted instruction. This is still, again, back in the 60s and early 70s. I always find it amusing to these very smart people who were looking towards the future and what they thought about the technology. So Thomas Watson, chairman of IBM in '43, said, "I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers." Popular Mechanics in 1949. Computers in the future may weigh no more than 1.5 tons. These were champions of industry. These were people that knew. And then Ken Olsen, a big technology computer corporation, digital equipment corporation, DEC. There's no reason anyone in their right state of mind will want a computer in their home. Well, times have changed, haven't they? They really have. So the first, there's these Silicon Valley, right? This is in the early 1970s. I was finishing up my undergraduate degree. I just finished it up, and there's these computer nerds. This was, they'd get together, a computer club, And this was really the first kit. It was an Altair 8800 and didn't do much of anything. But they all got together. They were very excited about doing some very simple programs. But things really changed 3 years later when the first Apple and the first Tandy Radio Shack was released. We affectionately called it the Trash 80. This was my first computer. And we loaded the system and we loaded applications by a cassette recorder. There was no floppy drives. There was no hard drives. There was no flash drives. It was a painstaking process of loading information. I played a lot of asteroids and played a lot of simple games. And there, of course, was very little instructional applications. So what really revolutionized it for education around that same time, the Apple II. And they did come out with that 5¼ disk drive, which is actually our first OTAN logo was a 5¼ disk drive. And I was pretty excited about this. And Apple had a really smart move. They seeded schools and they provided schools. So Apple's foothold in education, which still to this day is very strong, I think because they had the foresight back in the 70s and 80s to provide these to schools. It was the same situation, though. There was very little software. You would load the operating system in one drive. If you're lucky enough to be able to afford 2 drives, you could put the operating system in one and your application in the other drive. But there was a simple word processing program. There was a simple spreadsheet. But in terms of instructional content, it was pretty limited. Well, IBM's watching Apple and says, we better get on with it. So in 1981, one of the first IBM PCs didn't have the elegance of the Apple environment, but they're forced to be reckoned with. So that's my bit of history. Let's move on into the nature of information and how it's changed our environment. So 30 years ago, 30 years ago, information was still pretty scarce. It was expensive. There were more limited people. This was before the web, remember. It was controlled by a more limited number of people. It was designed for basically, I send information to you. It was slow moving. And it was pretty much external to our environment, to our worlds. Flash forward to today. A president that tweets daily. Information is all around us. It's flowing around this room. I walk into the room, I log into the wireless internet, and suddenly I'm connected to the world. It's really shaped by you now. It's shaped by people that tweet, that use Instagram, that do interaction. It's designed for feedback and sharing. It's immediate, and it's a part of our very existence. Everything we do now is we utilize the web and the internet for so much in our personal lives and obviously in our professional lives as well. So I've talked for years about this three-legged stool, if you will, and these are the critical legs of the stool that's building this revolution for us. And remember, we're still early on in the revolution. It's that revolution of connectivity and how that's changing the world around us, of devices themselves, and of content. So those three components are what's bringing this revolution to the field that we do for adult education. I want to spend some time talking a little bit about some of the current trends and moving a little bit into the future and what we can expect down the road. Let's start with connectivity. So internet growth clearly has been on a very fast track. Can't see the numbers, but the bottom number, dark blue line is less than a high school graduate. So what's happening to the internet growth for those at the lower education spectrum? What do you think is happening? They're connecting via mobile, via their phones. So they're dropping their broadband connections. So that's why broadband growth, this is from Pew Internet in American Life, which does a lot of research on trends in technology. And it's kind of stabilizing out for those at the higher education level. So those top 3 lines are high school graduate, some college, and college graduate, stabilizing out at about 90% for college graduates. Meanwhile, the traffic, the amount of data flowing over the internet continues to increase significantly. You can see that the light blue is internet video. No surprise there. Look at the amount of video traffic now that's going off across the internet. But all forms, gaming obviously is increasing, file sharing is increasing, and video on demand, IP video on demand. there were a lot of technologists that said, you know, the internet's going to come crashing down. It's going to collapse in on itself. It just can't handle all this traffic. And yet, here we are today, using it effectively, doesn't seem to be slowing down. So they keep developing new workarounds and developing faster pathways for the data to move. So that's exabytes, new word if you haven't heard that before. Exabytes is 1 billion gigabytes. That's a whole lot of data. That's a lot of data. So that will continue to grow, and there doesn't seem to be any stopping it. I think it will just continue to increase. So one of the things, too, that adult learners, and we still have a significant population that don't have connectivity, or they're connected via their phones, which is still a limited tool for instruction. It's because of the screen size itself and the cost of data. So there are ways to provide connectivity. Most of you should be familiar with this service that was originally started by, let's see, the U.S. Department of Education, called Everyone On. And basically what it allows you to do, to put in a zip code and provides information about digital literacy training opportunities in a person's community, but also gives them connection for low-cost internet service, some as cheap as $10 to $15 a month. So that's everyoneon.org/adulted. But the real game changer, if you will, is mobile phones and mobility. And that's really changing the whole story, especially for the adult learners that we work with. So into the future, a lot of discussion just over the last couple of weeks about 5G. About 3 weeks ago, the Chinese made an announcement. They're aggressively moving forward with 5G and 6G, faster connections. So with 4G, which most of us are connected on, it's about 10 to 15 megabits per second. With 5G, it's a full gigabit per second. So that's faster than most home connections. So that's why I say it's a revolution. So in the not too distant future, phones will have that same level of connectivity that we do when you have a very fast connection at home. So you'll see this, some of the new phones that are now being released have 5G capability over the next couple of years. A lot of them will, and I think we'll see it pretty much fully implemented here in the United States within several years. The other revolution that's happening that I'm really excited about, and by the way, that picture of those rockets landing, the Elon Musk SpaceX rockets, how cool was that? Two ships coming down at the same time and landing. So Elon Musk, he may be a bear to work for, but I tell you, the guy's pretty brilliant. With cars and batteries. But one of the things I think is pretty amazing, he's putting up 4,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. It's already started. He already put up his first satellites a couple of weeks ago. Several different companies. SpaceX is building basically a satellite-based internet network. Now, there's been satellite-based internet for a long time, and if you live in a rural area, that's how you got internet. This will be different. First of all, it'll be lower cost, and it will blanket the Earth. Other companies are doing the same, but using slightly different technologies. Little satellites, tiny little satellites in low Earth orbit. All right, moving on into digital device trends. So one of the most significant, I think, is Chromebooks. So these are really a revolution for education. I think one of the big pushes, many of you know the new testing system, several years old now, Smarter Balanced and Adaptive Tests. School districts were faced with purchasing thousands, tens of thousands of computers, so they went with Chromebooks. Number one, they're relatively inexpensive. They're just internet-based. They're fully, again, like web-based environment. But the good thing for a lot of schools that are short-staffed is that one tech can literally support thousands of devices. And then you add on all those other Google capabilities, and suddenly you have a very robust system. So it makes a lot of sense, and I know that a lot of adult schools are purchasing these. I think they're very effective tools. Smartphones continue to be an explosion of new devices. This is a device, as many of you know, that most all adult learners have. They get smartphones to communicate with their peers, their friends, and communicate with other people from the countries they may have emigrated from. The other thing that's cool about smartphones, there's a huge investment that's continuing to go on with smartphone technology. Hundreds of thousands of apps are available. And this kind of mobile technology is replacing television and radio. So there's some folks already. There's a couple of sessions here. OTAN has done a lot of exploratory work in this area. I think a lot of tremendous potential. And that is an area that's continuing to grow for those with less than a high school diploma. You can see that top line there is the lowest level. So 77% of adults now own smartphones, up from 35% in 2011. 95% of Americans own phones. But most common among younger adults, non-whites, less educated, lower-income Americans. But pretty much everyone has smartphones. So where are we going with display devices? A lot of the projection systems, a lot of the whiteboards kind of being relegated to the side. Large displays are being used. Apple TV is being used quite a bit. So I think the display technologies will continue to change. There will always be a place, I think, for projectors for large rooms. But for the classroom now, I think the technology is changing. With emerging trends, 2 companies last week announced foldable phones. Samsung Galaxy Fold and Huawei Mate X. Look at it right now. It looks like just a standard cell phone, doesn't it? But look what happens. You open it and literally fold it open. So, and then the screen automatically changes. It's interesting reading some of the pundits, and they describe, oh, this won't catch on. Yes, they are expensive. I think Huawei wants $2,000 for the phone. Pretty pricey. But I think the price will come down. It's still very new technology. But it uses a type of screen technology that's flexible, OLED technology. I think this will have a lot of applications for adult learners because, again, that real estate, we've got more space to put information on. It's hard for a lot of adults to, and it's difficult for programmers to make effective content and deliver it using a very small screen. So I'm excited about this, and I think we will definitely see a trend with foldable type technology. Pretty exciting. Okay, now I'd like to show you 2 other technologies that maybe aren't so relevant for adult education, but are just really cool. So, and I know you're fellow techies, and you love this stuff too. So, any of you Star Trek fans? A couple of you, yeah. The Replicator, remember the Replicator, right? So, 3D and digital makerspace, where students are creating things. It's gotten very big in K-12, and there are some wonderful labs around California now. But these Livermore Lawrence National Labs and UC Berkeley have come up with this new system for developing 3D materials. Normally they use this extrusion. It's this coil, basically. So check this one out. So there's an object, right? And pictures are taken of this object to calculate a projection sequence, basically. Pictures are taken from different angles of this object. Those images are then taken and put into a projection device. The projector, this is very different 3D technology than what we've seen. The projector basically projects that into this viscous substance. It's a resin-based substance. And as that resin turns the projector, it's building that image. Or as they say, the entire geometry materializes at once. So and then they pour off the uncured resin and the finished object. Isn't that wild? So that's why I said kind of the replicator. It's kind of moving to that next generation. Okay, the other one, there was a little clip. I thought when I saw this video, I thought it was both scary and really intriguing. Boston Dynamics, which is probably a lot of you have seen, it was kind of viral on the internet. But this robot that can do parkour. Look at the way this thing moves. That's not a human in there. That's a robot. But going up and making those kinds of moves, 5 years ago, just walking up a set of stairs was a big thing for a robot. Now robots are doing parkour. So technology that's quickly advancing and quickly changing. Pretty wild, huh? Okay, let's go to the final leg of the three-legged stool, and that's digital content trends. What's trending for adult education? Well, very clearly, apps, and I'm pleased to see a couple of sessions here on apps and selecting apps. They continue to grow. More are being developed. Open educational resources finally taking hold. Social and collaborative media, incredibly powerful, especially among and between students. Learning management systems continue to evolve and get more sophisticated. And perhaps the most significant of all, online and blended learning. So as most of you know, an app is an abbreviation for an application. And basically, it's a piece of software. It runs primarily on mobile devices. And by the way, Apple announced that they are going to unify their apps for just all devices. So an app can run on the internet, it can run on the computer, it can run on a smartphone or a tablet. Two big repositories, which all of you know, and if you create an app, you want to get them into the Google Play Store or into the Apple App Store. That's how they're distributed. Apple has a much more rigorous process. There are just as many apps, I think, for both platforms. But there are other app distributors as well, and places where they're stored. The Amazon App Store has apps. Interesting that the US government makes lots of apps, and some dealing with jobs and employment and health, and just really covering the gamut. And then there are several sites that have best app collections. And the vetting process, kind of questionable. I wish we had a project here in California that reviewed apps for their appropriateness to different learning populations. Maybe with this new state superintendent, we'll see a resurgence in state-supported ed tech. But apps are created by little. I know COAID has created apps, CCAE has created apps, and the county office. OTAN has been involved in creating some apps, some really fun stuff that have been integrated into various courses. And lo and behold, many of you are probably familiar with the X Prize. And just last week, they announced 2 teams tied for the grand prize. There's still additional work with X Prize that's undergoing this coming year with testing in the community, but these are the 2 winners, Learning Upgrade and People for Words. Learning Upgrade is available both for Android and iOS at no cost, and just log into the store. And People for Words is available for the Android at no cost. Can you imagine that? I thought we were such a small little part of the pie, and here X Prize committed to a significant amount of money to supporting app development. Very exciting. Some of the OTAN staff has been very emphatic, as am I, the potential of open education resource, and I see Penny smiling, as she's a major proponent. Sure. And this will be posted on the TDLS website. Yeah. So Melinda says sure. It'll be posted with all the links. Sure. Okay. All right. So open educational resources, basically in simple terms, and I like this definition the best from OER Commons, teaching and learning materials that you may freely use and reuse without charge. However, there are lots of different licenses, and with one's called Creative Commons, another one GNU, and so you need to understand the licensing. And Penny is great at helping to explain and make sense of all those different licenses. Yeah, are you doing a session here? You need to go to a Penny session on it. So anyway, you can, and the range of content is just absolutely amazing. Colleges now are going full bore with OER, and I think they have a lot of potential. There's some great quality materials out there. And covers the gamut from games, interactive materials, fully engaged courses too. It's really very diverse. Before I retired, Penny and I were involved with a project with the U.S. Department of Ed and AIR, American Institutes for Research. And if you're just interested but don't have the time to go in depth, there's a couple of collections that I would urge you to take a look at. My favorite is OER Commons, and they have categorized adult ed. Isn't that wonderful? So they actually, as they're looking at OER, you can now search their database by those that are appropriate for adult learners. Cricky is another huge collection of available OER. Moving right along, social media. 90% of young people use social media, and it's consistent across race, ethnicity, and income groups. And of course, the most popular, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Instagram, and Tumblr. But it is. Hardly anyone now develops that doesn't have a school site, has a Facebook presence, projects. I think if you go to all of the consortia, you'll find some type of a Facebook presence and certainly a website. It's used for program promotion and marketing, classroom management, projects and assignments. But there's some great instructional ones. ESL Pod's been around for many years. And USA Learns realized that, just all the learners have mobile devices. So they developed a series of apps to reinforce the vocabulary being taught within USA Learns. Learning management systems first came out about 30 years ago, Blackboard being the big dog. It's kind of evolved. But there are literally hundreds now of learning management systems that are out there. One of the big ones that still is primarily used by a lot of K-12, and you can get into it and start using it for free initially, but it has limited features. So I think what made Schoology so popular is it was designed from the ground up to be web-based. So we're much more comfortable with the environment, where a lot of the other major systems were kind of legacy projects where they moved into the web-based environment, but it's simply not as elegant to use. But Moodle makes a lot of sense for OTAN, and that's why Moodle has been used as the primary tool for OTAN. So here's an example really where OTAN has really played a major role. Look, it's not realistic for adult schools, especially independent or small ones, to set up their own Moodle server and manage it. Yes, it is free. It's free like a puppy, right? It still takes maintenance and time. So that's what OTAN does for you. And OTAN has developed this amazing repository of courses over the years that you can take, you can adopt, you can adapt. Most importantly, though, you can use their technical resources. Here's an economy of scale and a function of OTAN that is benefiting all of California. So take advantage of those courses. Melinda Holt will probably talk about Google and how Google is doing some doing some amazing things. And of course, the price is right. But it's not, it's kind of a LMS-like system, but it's more collaboration, exchange, so sharing homework, sharing files. It's not this complete interactive environment for developing instruction, which Moodle or Schoology offers. So it's a little bit different. But given that so many schools and districts now use Google, it may make sense for you to use that as a tool as well. And then, of course, there are other derivations. Besides OTAN, the other project I'm most proud of having been involved in is USA Learns. What a great project, and I'm just excited that it's still living on today. A new citizenship course was released, but behind this is a learning management system. It was customized just for adult learners. And by the way, they are developing another new course. There's another new course coming out for USA Learns. Perhaps the greatest potential for adult ed is blended learning. I'm just jazzed about this. And I think it's just now really taking hold. Clayton Christensen, early pioneer and thinker and thought person on distance learning, came up with these models. Well, some of these models are not relevant, but a lot of K-12 kind of adopted these kinds of different models, the rotation, the flex model, the self-blend model. But if you want a good document and a good read, David Rosen, many of you know the name, good friend of mine, developed a book on blended learning for the adult education classroom. So if you're more interested in blending learning, I highly recommend that you take a look at this. He goes into what it looks like, the teaching tools, assessments, does comparison with flipped learning. But given the transience and given the nature of the population we work with, having that best of both worlds, that ability to have that human contact along with the independent work that blending learning involves. Many of our students are simply not ready for a complete online learning environment, whereas many can foster, thrive, and be very successful in a blended learning environment. Which brings me to software. Don't underestimate the importance of evaluating software. And again, this is really critical. Does it meet the needs of your learner? And really important, you don't need a license to make software, and there's some really bad, poorly designed software out there. So as you're looking and thinking of getting new software, using new apps, using new websites, look carefully at the user interface, how it engages the learner, the appropriate use of media, and does it comply to universal design. So what are the emerging trends with content? Two areas that I predict. One, artificial intelligence. Countries are investing huge sums of money in artificial intelligence. And one of the big companies in San Francisco I visited with a couple of years ago, it's called Newton. And they've developed these sophisticated environments that really tailor instruction like nothing I've ever seen before. It's really down to the individual learner. This is not programmed learning. This is responding to content based on how the learner thinks and how they move through content. It really is a revolution in learning. There are a couple of adult education projects, one out of Georgia State. Even Houghton Mifflin now has taken the Newton engine and now makes a math course using artificial intelligence that's commercially available for K-12. So I think in the very near future, we will see a lot more content. Hopefully a lot of that will be appropriate for adult learners. The other area I think we'll see a lot more of augmented reality. Not virtual reality, but augmented reality. Think about that. The ability of a student to be able to see the world around and move into an instructional environment, basically while still being in the existing environment. It sounds a little bizarre. And I think there is a session that yes, Farsana will be doing a session on that. I think it's pretty exciting, but because it's that combination of real world, and so many of our learners need that bootstrap. But for language learning, for CTE, I can really see it for all kinds of applications. So let me finish up based on my 40 years of working in the field of adult education technology. What are the 5 key factors for success that you need to be aware of, both as a program administrator and as an individual, as a classroom teacher? Number 1 is commitment. It's commitment. And I know you're all committed because you're here. You come to these kinds of sessions. You're hungry for the knowledge. You're the technology omnivores. That's why I feel so good about being with this group. Because technology in an agency, though, you have to be committed, but also the administration needs to be committed. It's both. Technology implementation is a top-down and bottom-up process. It has to be both. Second is integration. Technology, I was over doing some videotaping at San Juan Adult School up in Sacramento area, and I was so thrilled at the Sunrise Tech Center that technology is in every classroom, ESL level 1, and just everybody's using technology throughout the environment. Lots of Chromebooks, it's fully integrated across the classes, across the curriculum, to both individualized instruction and increased collaboration. It's no longer a pullout. It's just part of what we do. It's not something separate anymore. Content, talked briefly about that. To evaluate the content, again, we don't have the advantage of some outfit saying, this is the best, this will work for your students. And frankly, it can't do that. There is no one piece of software, right? So you need to look at software carefully, look at it for instructional design, instructional effectiveness, look at the content. It really is worth the time, and to ensure that you get buy-in from your fellow staff. Number 4 is what I often refer to as total cost of ownership or maintenance. Look, you buy a car, you think you're not going to take it back to the mechanic ever? It just has to go back. It needs repair. You eventually replace it. Same thing with technology. So everyone that's involved in an agency needs to be aware that it needs to be regularly updated and refreshed. It gets old. It needs to be maintained. And finally, training. Professional development is ongoing and it's institutionalized. And that's what you get over the next day and a half. So I tribute to OTAN of making the commitment, and I wish you the very best over the next day and a half. Thank you.